So we just finished one of the greatest stories in Wuthering, maybe even one of the greatest stories in the entirety of Gacha. And in just a couple of days, we're heading into one of the greatest stories in Genshin Impact. And the beauty of this situation is that both stories feature some of the most interesting characters that both games have to offer. But in this video, we're interested in specific characters from both stories. Characters who, in my opinion, have done a great job in pushing the story forward and making it memorable. And we'll be seeing how they compare against each other. Now, upon playing the story of Wuthering, we're introduced to so many characters, all with interesting lore, all fascinating to explore. But Septimon's story gave us Avidius, who absolutely kills it when it comes to interest and memorability. And within Genshin Impact, a character that stands out from really any other in the game is Dainsleif, one of the most interesting and important characters in the entirety of Genshin Impact. And we're going to take these two characters and see who is depicted better, who is written better, who is more nuanced, and ultimately, who is more interesting between the two. So if you're into this kind of content, make sure to like the video and let me know what you think about both of these characters. What do you think of Avidius? What do you think of Dainsleif? Who do you find more interesting? Who do you resonate with more? Tell me all that and more in the comments below, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel on any of my future videos. Before we get into it, this video is sponsored by U7Buy. Where you're looking for a cheap, safe, and trusted digital marketplace for all things gacha, U7Buy is the best choice. U7Buy offers unbeatable pricing for top-ups in your favorite gacha, up to 25% off, and still 10 to 15% cheaper than official platforms. And here's how easy it is to top up. Simply enter your account UID and server, and your top-up will be processed instantly. Join over 100 million satisfied customers worldwide and check out the 30,000 plus positive reviews on Testpilot. So the question is, do you want the best deals for your in-game top-ups? Then simply click the links in the description or pinned comments below to save even more. And here is where you can save extra. When you are checking out, simply enter my discount code TNP to save an extra 3% on already low prices. U7Buy, your gateway to the best gaming top-up deals, fast delivery, and unbeatable prices. So thank you U7Buy for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into it. Now, the topic of interest between these two characters is very fascinating, especially considering the fact that Dainsleif and Avidius are two extremely different characters. Unlike something like Augusta and Mavuika, who had extremely similar roles, whether in terms of position, title, or actual role they played in their respective stories, Dainsleif and Avidius share nothing like that. So even though we're going to delve into their individual stories in this analysis, the kind of interest we're focusing on in this video is how interesting they are to us, the players. What has each individual game done to make both characters interesting? What has each game done to make them stand out, to make them more memorable? And ultimately, which game has done a better job by creating this sense of interest and memorability in both characters? So let's start with Dainsleif. Now, it is no surprise to anyone that Dainsleif is one of the most interesting characters in Genshin Impact. You see, right now in Nordcry, we can clearly see that there is a convergence happening in the story, a point where everyone's journey is starting to connect. But in the regions before Nordcry, we know that the story was never really like that. It was mostly split into two major paths: the Archon quest and the Dainsleif quest. The Archon quest were mainly about traveling from nation to nation, getting involved in the struggle of each land, solving their problems, meeting their gods, the Archons who ruled them. But the Dainsleif quest were something else entirely, because depending on who you ask, they were actually the more important quest. They didn't just tell a story about the world, they told our story, the story of the traveler, the journey of trying to find our siblings, which at the time was the core focus of our journey. And if you needed any proof of how important these quests were, these were the quests that officially made it canon that our names were either Aether or Lumine, depending on who you chose at the start of the game. And at the heart of every single one of these moments was Dainsleif. He was the center of these quests, the driver of these quests. And for the better part of 5 years, we've gotten numerous Dainsleif quests, each one exploring Dainsleif as a character, each one peeling back another layer, revealing more about him, and giving us deeper insights into some of the most important aspects of Genshin Impact's story. Now, when you compare this to Avidius, the contrast becomes clear. Because when we talk about Avidius, you realize that he's not nearly as important to the story of Wuthering as Dainsleif is to Genshin Impact. Dainsleif has been a recurring presence throughout the story for the better part of 5 years, ever since the beginning of Genshin Impact all the way back to our journey in Mondstadt. But Avidius, on the other hand, was a character introduced only in Septimont. His entire arc lasted barely 3 months. And unlike Dainsleif, Avidius wasn't a key figure tied deeply to the lore of Wuthering Waves. Avidius was a very story-specific character. His entire arc existed within the context of the Septimont storyline. So objectively, Dainsleif should be the more interesting character, right? I mean, say what you will about Genshin Impact. We've established numerous times on this channel that while Genshin storytelling leaves a lot to be desired, Genshin's story itself is absolutely phenomenal. phenomenal. And Dainsleif is one of those characters who stands right at the forefront of that story. Combine that with the fact that Dainsleif has been a part of this narrative since the very beginning, for the better part of 5 years. And it should be a no-brainer that Dainsleif must be the more interesting character. But here's where things get strange. If I were to ask you, regardless of which side you support, whether you're a Genshin Impact fan or a Wuthering Waves fan, if I asked you who the more interesting character is between Dainsleif and Avidius, I don't think a lot of people would say Dainsleif. In fact, I think a lot of you would hesitate. A lot of thoughts would go through your mind before you could even answer what should have been an easy question. So the big question is, why? Why should there even be a debate between a character like Dainsleif and another like Avidius, when one of them has every single advantage that the other never had? And I believe that the main reason behind this entire dilemma is a single word: representation. See, a couple of weeks back, I made a video diving deep into the nuances of the Wuthering Waves NPCs, really going into everything that make these characters stand out from every other NPC in the entirety of Gacha. But one thing I did not talk about in that video was how well Wuthering Waves handled the idea of representation. Cause you see, Gacha games, unlike most other games, don't just tell one story. They tell a wide array of different stories, and within those stories, you have a wide range of concepts, ideas, and factions, all existing side by side. The problem though is that it is nearly impossible to explore all of these in full detail. There is simply not enough time for these games to tell every story they set up. So to solve that problem, Gacha games do something incredibly smart. Instead of putting those ideas or factions to the side, instead of completely forgetting about them, they assign characters to represent them. And through these characters, we're able to gain a deep understanding of the concepts, the ideologies, and the factions that they embody. Take the Knights of Avidius and Genshin Impact, for example. The reality is, we'll probably never get into the fine details or know the exact inner workings of the Knights of Avidius, but through the characters who represent them, Jean, Kaya, Lisa, and Albedo, we already have a clear understanding of who these knights are. We know what they stand for, we know what they believe in, we know what they fight for, the ideals, the value, and the beliefs that define them. The same can be said about the Order of the Deep in Wuthering Waves. Now that we've reached the end of Renacita, we know for a fact that we will likely never get a story that gives us direct, detailed insights into the Order itself. But even then, we already have a clear understanding of what the Order of the Deep is, and that is because of the characters who represent it. Fenrico, who embodies the darker, more twisted side of the Order, and Phoebe, who represents the good, the pure, and the hopeful side of it. And through them, we understand that there is duality shaping the Order, that these two characters don't just represent the faction itself, but also the balance and conflict within it. And these kinds of representations of factions, of concepts, of philosophies can be seen throughout both games, both Genshin Impact and Wuthering Waves. But most importantly, the same kind of representation can also be seen in both Avidius and Dainsleif. In the story that Avidius was involved in, he didn't just represent a faction, he represented something much deeper and something far more important, especially within the story of Septimus. He represented the idea of defying fate. Fate being one of the core concepts that the entire story of Septimus revolves around. And let me tell you, Wuthering Waves did a phenomenal job in depicting Avidius, especially when it came to what he represented. Because not only did Wuthering Waves give us an entertaining experience through his story, they gave us a human experience. They gave us something that felt raw, emotional, and deeply personal. Through Avidius, we see the reaction of someone who was essentially betrayed by fate, someone who believed he was born in glory, destined for greatness, someone who believed that every achievement he had earned was his own, but in reality, he was quite literally born from evil. He was created by Christophora, one of the major antagonists of Wuthering Waves, and it was made from the frequency of a mad king who had surrendered himself completely to darkness. And when that truth came to light, when Avidius realized that everything that he had accomplished was built on lies kept into the heads of everyone around him, we saw something rare. We saw raw human emotion, the existential dread that comes from that revelation, the pain, the guilt, the self-hatred. But also through Avidius, we saw someone who refused to break, someone who decided to keep pushing forward, someone who chose to defy the fate that was handed to him. Knowing he was born from evil, he chose to do good. Knowing he came from darkness, he chose to seek light. And even in his death, even in his final moments, he died doing good. He died trying to be remembered as someone who lived his life with meaning, as someone who spent every last breath fighting to do what was right. And when you play through Avidius' story, it is no surprise why people have such a raw emotional reaction to him. Because Avidius isn't just a side character. He's not someone who exists just to hype the protagonist or move the story forward. No, Avidius' story is a story, a complete story on its own. A story that could stand apart from the main narrative and still be told beautifully, powerfully, and entirely. And when you experience that story for yourself, it is nothing short of phenomenal. But with Dainsleif, it's a different case, because just like Avidius, there are also things that Dainsleif represents. He represents everything surrounding Khaenri'ah, which, as we know, is one of the most interesting and one of the darkest stories in all of Genshin Impact. And understanding that, you would think that through Dainsleif, we would come to understand that pain, that sorrow, that madness. You would believe that through Dainsleif, we would feel the weight of all the tragedy that befell Canria. You would believe that this understanding would make him a much more nuanced character, a much more relatable character, and a much more human character than you might have first imagined. But let me ask you a question. When you look at Dainsleif, do you see someone relatable? Do you see someone you connect with on a personal level? And even more than that, do you see someone through whom you can feel all that pain, that tragedy, that history of loss? Or do you see someone whose entire purpose in the story is simply to drive the plots? See, the story of Canria tells us that due to their transgressions, the people of Canria were cursed. Some were given the curse of the wilderness, while others were burdened with the curse of immortality. And because of that curse, the people of Canria developed a deep disdain, a pure burning hatred towards the gods. Because that curse did not just change their lives, it shattered them. It created deep pain and deep heartache for everyone who lived through it. Now, when it comes to Dainsleif Quest, yes, I've gotten the exposition. I've heard everything that happened in Canria, about its fall, about its suffering, about everything that transpired. But through Dainsleif himself, I don't think I felt nearly enough of that tragedy. I don't think I felt enough of that pain, of that sorrow, of that heartache that I would expect from someone who represents Canria. Dainsleif should be the embodiment, the purest representation of everything surrounding Canria. All its pain, all its beauty, all its tragedy, and yet, I have never really felt that through him. And when you really think about it, what is crazy is that most other Canrians we've come across in this game has done a significantly better job at depicting this tragedy than Dainsleif himself. The Curse of the Wilderness, for instance, we saw that depicted through Caribert and Derideth, and their stories were tragic. The kind of tragedy that stays with you, the kind that you don't just forget after the cutscene ends. And then the Curse of Immortality, which we saw embodied through Capitano. Someone the curse has disfigured so badly that he hides his face beneath a mask, just so no one can see what he's become underneath. And even that burning hatred towards the gods, we saw it in Clotho Alberic, someone who wasted no time showing us his absolute disdain for the divine. His words, his tone, everything about him screamed resentment and loss. Every other Canrian we've met in this world has shown us pieces of that tragedy in ways that feel real. But the one person we've traveled with the longest, the one person whose story we've been following for nearly 5 years, it feels different. It feels like his entire role has been to make these stories happen, rather than to be a living embodiment of what Canria truly represents. See, when it's all said, the topic of Avidius versus Dainsleif, more than anything, highlights Genshin Impact's fundamental storytelling flaws. Like I said earlier, Dainsleif was given every chance to be better. His story had been told over a much longer period of time than Avidius's. The core of his story is also far more interesting, and on top of that, he's a much more relevant character within his own game. But unfortunately, as we've seen time and time again with Genshin Impact, characters with so much potential and narrative advantage still somehow end up falling short. In contrast, the writers of Wuthering did a phenomenal job with Avidius, crafting a character who feels more relatable, more grounded, more emotionally compelling, and ultimately more memorable. But now I want to hear what you think. What do you make of the entire arguments between Avidius and Dainsleif? Who do you believe is the stronger character? And what do you think could have been done to make the other more interesting than they currently are? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.